My name is Andrew Duden, and I do work at the Oregon Jewish Museum. I was a classroom teacher for 26 years in the Portland metro area, and predominantly taught 9th grade world history. I'm also someone who, what else was I going to say about myself? Oh, that I'm an Oregon native. And I wanted to make this very, very clear to everyone here how grateful I am to be out here at Eastern Oregon University in the beautiful Eastern Oregon wilds of La Grande. My childhood was spending a lot of time doing backpacking in the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest. So I was stoked to see that we've got Joseph in the house, and we've got Enterprise here, and we've got Elgin here, which you drive through on your way out there. That was exciting for me. My family, my grandmother, she's from Pendleton, so a lot of times hanging out, going to the Pendleton Roundup and Happy Canyon and all that good stuff, which you guys are familiar with. We also have, hopefully, I think we have some people who are heading down towards the Malheur, Harney area. Steens Mountains, absolutely spectacular. A lot of my childhood there. Steens Mountain High Altitude Running Camp as a kid. So anyway, the Eastern Oregon, man, I love it out here. It's great to be out here, and it's great to see that so many teachers are here. So I just wanted to give a shout out and a recognition to all of you. My presentation is going to be a little bit different, and that is not to say that Emily's presentation wasn't off the charts. And one of the things that impresses me so much about the Oregon Historical Society is how they organize their curriculum and looking at their lesson plans and the way that they're designed. And it made me jealous, and I thought, oh my gosh, I got to sit down with Emily and ask her if I can plagiarize their design, because one thing that I'm thinking about their design is, for all of us as educators in the state of Oregon, wouldn't it be nice if all of the stuff that we're producing has a very, very similar design model? So we'll hopefully talk about that, and by next year, it's all going to be looking great. Our stuff is cool. We're a smaller organization, though, the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. I'm not going to talk about much of the museum. One thing that I thought might be helpful for some of us, I looked at the roster of where folks are from, obviously, because I said to all of you, I gave some shouts out to some geographic locations, but also, I didn't want to just assume that all of us are coming here with an expertise in primary source instruction. So I thought, if the title of this thing is Teaching with Primary Sources, I thought we could not only talk about how we do it, but the why of why we do it, and also why I think teaching with primary sources is so beneficial. So it's going to be maybe, and also for those of us who are like, man, I use primary sources all the time, and I use all kinds of resources. You don't have to sell me on that. Just be patient as we go through that portion of the presentation. So I'm going to pick up the clicker. And the other thing that I think is awesome about this group is that we've got kindergarten through 12th grade. So I'm just curious, how many people here, just by a show of hands, teach primarily elementary? So we're talking K through 5. Where are our K through 5 teachers? All right, cool. And then who here are secondary teachers, middle school through high school? All right, so it's kind of an even mix, which is awesome. And some of the stuff I'm going to be sharing with you is explicitly designed for elementary. Some of it is explicitly designed for secondary. Okay, so we're going to start with this. This is some curriculum that is available on our website. This is a screenshot, and I gave you guys, I think it's a handout. It might be coming to you as a hyperdoc that can link directly to this curriculum if you want to. I want to provide some context about A Year in the Life, a 1904 Jewish immigrant experience in Oregon. We have a teacher advisory board, we have a K through 5 teacher advisory board, and we have a K-12 or 6 through 12 teacher advisory board, and we're actually taking applications soon. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, note to self, because it's statewide. And I am a secondary school teacher. I taught high school. And I met with the K-5 teachers, and I asked them, what's a transformative educational experience for elementary school kids? And they said, well, if you can bring something in that's hands-on, that they can hold in their hands, and it's real, and they can pass it around and talk to it like an artifact, right? That's when they're really getting engaged. And so what we did is we created digital curriculum, which is not hands-on, right? And it tells this fictional story of an immigrant. So if you're doing any unit on immigration, and by the way, that could be also for secondary educators, if you want to check this out, and it tells the story of a Jewish immigrant coming from Poland named Chaim Kubrick. It's based on the life of our former director's uncle. So it is fictionalized, though. And the digital learning activities are accompanied by this. This is the thing. So you're in the middle of it, and you're like, okay, so this is Chaim's life in October. Guess what? We have his suitcase, and the kids are going to be like, that's my hope, all right? Oh my gosh, it's a suitcase. Okay, it's really like a briefcase, right? No. You know, it's what we had in our closet. So then what the kids do is they're like, what's in the suitcase? And there's all this stuff. So without telling you guys anything, I'm just going to start handing out stuff that's in Chaim's quote-unquote suitcase, and you're going to look at it, and you're going to be like, what is it? The goal is not going to tell you anything about it. So one of the things that I think is really, and you can pass it with your little table group or whatever, and feel free to open up the box, take it out, take a look. What do you think this is? And then the other question is, why do you think it's in this suitcase? So that's the question that we'd ask kids. Like, why would Chaim have this in his suitcase? And you can pass it along and take a look. Okay, I'm running thin. Pass it to the folks behind you. Okay, why is it in the suitcase? That's the $1 million question. Why would Chaim be carrying this thing around? Here's the, okay, here's another thing. Pass it back and forth. Here's another thing.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, so make sure that everyone, did you guys not get anything? Okay, things are coming your way. Things are coming your way. Because my suitcase now is empty. Yeah. And you can pass it forward, you can pass it backwards, but let's take 3 minutes to look at stuff. Here's the next question. This is what I do often with, especially middle school students when they're in the museum. Everyone, hold up both of your fists like this for me for just a moment. This is what we call a formative assessment. No. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you're like, I know what that thing is. Give me a thumbs in the middle if you're like, I have a guess. Give me a thumbs down if you're like, we couldn't figure it out at all. And it's totally okay. There's no judgment here. Let's show me with your thumbs. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle. Okay, we got some thumbs up, some thumbs down. Okay. Give me a thumbs up looking at this. Give me a thumbs up if you're like, oh, I see why Chaim has this in his suitcase. Give me a thumbs in the middle if you're like, I don't know why this is in his suitcase. Give me a thumbs down if you're like, I don't see the connection because I don't even know what this thing is. Okay. All of that is the intention of the suitcase. Now, here's the cool thing. This is the good news. The good news is that the suitcase, you're like, well, that's nice, but how am I going to get the suitcase if I want to use it with my elementary school classroom? Intermountain ESD has one of these with all that stuff in it, and they have a courier service so they can send it to you. all right? So if you want to get this with all the gear in it, then that's how you would do that. And that's on our website. So also notice I have not given you any explanation of what it is. And that's intentional. And that's part of the point of the activity for students, is that it's totally a discovery lesson. And it gets kids to get their hands on these artifacts, share these artifacts with each other, and make some guesses. As the story progresses, however, the kids will know exactly what those things are. So it's learning progressively, and it's deepening their understanding of artifacts as they go on. I'll run around quickly because you guys didn't get to see everything. If you have an artifact just in your hands right now, just raise your hand and I'll cruise around and show you what they are. So one of the things that's inside the suitcase is a mezuzah. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of a mezuzah before. A mezuzah is what, if I'm religiously observant, I put on the door of my house. If I'm Orthodox Jewish, if I'm highly observant, this would go on the doorway of every single room in my house, except for the bathroom. And inside it's just nails to hang it, but inside, if you shake it, and this is described on the little card and also in the digital experience, there's a scroll that is written inside there with a prayer. It's got a little symbol on it that is the symbol for Shaddai, which is the word of God. Why do Jewish people put these on their door? It's to identify not only I am Jewish, but it's also a commandment that comes from the Torah. So it's something that God said, this is what you do. Okay, so we got that. This is, I don't know if you guys can't see it in the back because it's teeny, but it's a little pointer, and it's got a little finger on the end of it. It's kind of cool. This is called a yod. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of a yod before. A yod is used to read the Torah, so you don't touch the Torah. You actually put your finger on it, and when there's a Torah scroll in a synagogue, you use this because you don't want to touch it with your hands because it's handmade with ink, and if lots of hands got on it, that would cause a mess. But also because it's a sacred object, it's believed that the Torah has a soul, so it's something to treat with respect. Do we have anything over here? All right, cool. Then we got this is totally fake. It's not real at all. It's made out of plastic. And it is a ram's horn. Okay, it's called a shofar. Has anyone ever heard of a shofar before? We've got some hands in the air. So on the two high holidays of the year, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, a rabbi blows into the shofar, and there are short bursts of the shofar, and there's long, loud bursts of the shofar, and there's different reasons for doing that. A rabbi told me, my friend Josh told me, who's a rabbi, it's one of the most amazing things for him being Jewish is to hear the shofar, because there's no adornment on the thing at all. You don't put like a little trumpet horn, there's no reed or anything, it's just the animal horn, so you have to learn how to do it, which means that the sound that's being blown in that animal horn in a synagogue in 2024 is the exact same sound that a Jewish person would be hearing 3,000 years ago. And that connection historically is just it's so exciting. Rosh Hashanah is New Year, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, the rabbi blows, and this is also something that is like crystal clear in the Torah, the Hebrew scriptures, that says, yeah, ram's horn, blow it. That's what God says, and so that's what you do. All right, moving back around, some other things. There were some candlesticks over here, and that's for Shabbat. All right, we also had some candles all the way over there. So there's a whole part of the of Chaim's story about Shabbat and how it's celebrated as a Polish Jewish person. That's not necessarily the same way everyone does Shabbat. And so that's another part of the religious identity. So those things. are things that kids can look at and learn more about. Who else has something? We got something over here. This is good for me. Exercise. I was like, how am I going to do this? And now we're finding out. All right. This is an actual document from our archives. I just color photocopied it. It is a shipping schedule for a steamship from Rotterdam to New York that an immigrant would have, to know when to get on and how much it costs. So we put that in there as part of the immigrant experience. Do we have stuff over there? Okay, I'm laughing already because this is pretty janky and DIY, but I'm gonna give it. So we had this as well. This is just cardboard. This is made to represent matzah, which is a Jewish food. It's unleavened bread. I did this with spray paint in on my front yard. So yeah, but like that's what it looks like. So anyway, I brought it to the museum and I'm like, you guys, what's this? And they were like, it's matzah. And I said, yes, it is. And this probably would taste about as good as matzah tastes. So anyway, there's that. And there's lots of stuff in there about food. So onward and upward. I'll just collect these.
Anybody else? She's gonna lose the dreidel, but she's got.
Oh my gosh, we got a lot of stuff.
Yes,
all right. All right, cool. All right, so some of this other stuff, and I can sort of go through it categorically, which is interesting. So as you can see, some of these artifacts are cultural artifacts, and some of them are historical artifacts about an immigrant experience. The immigrant experience, we have these two things, and these are actually in our museum in Oregon Jewish Stories. The first one is this peddler's license, which was donated to the museum. A lot of Oregon Jews were peddlers or shopkeepers. And that's a history of discrimination that dates back to Europe, that Jews were only allowed certain occupations in Europe. And so Chaim has this fruit and vegetable peddler's license. Again, it's just a color copy of a metal copy that we have in our exhibition. I also made a copy of this Foreigner's Guide to English, which hopefully some of you got a chance to look at, because there's not much in here that, like, this is a cap. Okay, so anyway, the Foreigner's Guide to English, we also have this in our archives, and it's on display. When immigrants came to Oregon, and Jewish immigrants especially, in the Portland metro area, a neighborhood house was established by the National Council of Jewish Women, and then the head of programs, this woman, Ida Lowenberg, to provide all of these Americanization and assimilation programs for Jewish people, including like playing basketball, learning how to dance under the maypole, dancing like to jazz music, which would have been totally prohibited if you were a Polish Orthodox Jewish person in Poland. All this amazing stuff, and this as well, how to speak. This is a ketubah. Has anyone ever heard of a ketubah before? So this is a marriage license, and we have versions of marriage licenses, but a Jewish marriage license is a legal document that is very, very ancient, and it was canonized like in the 9th century by rabbis. Modern ketubahs, much, depending on your congregation, have changed a lot. Modern ketubahs can say like, I love you, honey, and I'll make you pancakes in the morning, but the old ones are very, very formulaic, and it really was designed in a highly paternalistic culture to make sure that the wife would be protected with her property in the event of a divorce, because that's allowed in the Torah. Anyway, so marriage, trying to hit all the cultural institutions here. And then finally, some more holiday things that are fun for kids, including this, which is called a grogger. I don't know if you guys have heard of a grogger before, but it's just a noisemaker, like somebody in the back was making noise with it. So that's awesome to put in the hands of a second grader, right? They'll just be like, but anyway, Yeah, we give these to middle school kids, and we're like, okay, you can put it down now. But this is for the holiday Purim, which is actually coming up. And it's a really raucous holiday, and people dress in costumes, and they put on plays. And you wouldn't tell kids this, but you're encouraged to do a lot of drinking. It's sort of like a Mardi Gras. And it's a story that comes from the book of Esther in the Bible. And it's about how Esther saved the Jews from this very, very evil guy, Haman. And so whenever it's read, if it happens in the synagogue or anywhere where the story is read, whenever Haman's name comes up, you're supposed to blot out his name. So everyone's like waiting, and then it's like Haman, and everyone's like, yeah! And so it's really raucous and fun. And that's not a holiday that probably a lot of students would know about the Jewish identity. Of course, lots of kids know a dreidel and how to play dreidel. There's instructions in there for how to play dreidel, and the dreidels in here. So that's Chaim's trunk, and that's specifically for elementary school classrooms. But again, I want to encourage you, if you're interested in getting your hands on this thing, that the Intermountain ESD has it, even for a middle school class or a high school class doing a unit on immigration. The other thing that I want to point out about that experience that we just had is I think that the thing that's beautiful about primary source documents, number one, is the discovery aspect about them. That it's not me telling, I did a little show and tell there, but that you got to hold it, you got to talk about it, you got to make guesses about it, and it's very low stakes. I wasn't saying if you don't get it right, and I think that's what's beautiful about artifacts in particular. The other thing is I imagine, now that you've learned what those things are, you might have made some inferences that weren't correct, or were partially correct, and that's fine too. That's just deepening your understanding of those things. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on. One of the things that I think is really important for us when we're looking at primary sources is the first thing I think instructionally that's really, really important is giving that opportunity for identification. And Emily modeled that beautifully in her last, in the last little workshop that we did, just by having us look at a picture and asking the question, what do you see? We could have done the same thing here with these artifacts, and that's basically what I was asking you to do. What is it? What do you see? When we were walking around and we were trying to figure out those objects from Abraham Lincoln, all we were doing is we're just doing a level of identification. And when we think about Bloom's taxonomy, that's low stakes stuff cognitively, right? Anyone can do that. And so that's why I think it's really effective. It's inclusive, right? And even asking, what questions do you have about the object? I had some people, when I was handing out the artifacts, asking me, one person just said, what is it? Which is awesome. I had somebody else say, would this be blown today? And what you're doing is you're creating, I think, in the classroom, energy and buy-in on whatever you're trying to do. One thing that I think happens a lot, we're going to take a look at some rather disturbing pieces of Nazi propaganda in a minute, is the first thing that'll happen with a student, I notice more and more, is they want to absolutely identify the thing. Let me clarify what I mean. So the first thing that you'll do is you'll hand out this kiddish cup to kids, and you'll say, okay, take a look at it. Tell me what you see. And they'll be like, oh, it's a cup. Right? I'm done. I know what it is. And a good follow-up question or redirection that I actually got from Hannah at the Portland Art Museum when kids look at art is tell me what you see that makes you say that. So if you want a pedagogical trick for kids to look a little more deeply at something, I just think that's a great way to phrase it. I noticed I was saying that like 16 times to some 7th graders that I was working with just last week. That they want to immediately make an inference about something. Like, I know that this is a cup and it must be used by Jewish people. Okay, well there's some inferences there, right? So tell me what you see that makes you say it's a cup. What's the cup made out of? With things that get much more high level and abstract, like this thing that we're gonna take a look at, they might say, oh, well, this is a propaganda poster that's about a Jewish man who's really scary. Okay, well, what do you see that makes him scary? You know, what are the things that are done in this to make him scary? Why should we be afraid of this person? Tell me what you see that makes you say that. I think the point is well taken. So again, these are identification questions that we can facilitate with students when we're in the class, when they're looking at primary sources, if it's an archive, a photograph, a written document. The next thing that happens, the next important thing is inference. And Emily showed us inference. I'm sure that Alyssa's gonna have us make inferences, but what do you think it's used for? For a lot of us, we might not have any idea what this is used for, but we can certainly make some hypotheses, and making those kinds of hypotheses, I would argue, is critical thinking skills, right? I can see that this is a cup, and I can see, oh, it's got this marking. Is that the Star of David, a student might ask? Well, I wonder, do they use this maybe for something special because it's made out of silver? Maybe they use it for a religious holiday, and you're like, man, you are getting so close without me even telling you what it is, right? But that level of thinking is higher level thinking, right? But we want kids to have skills where they can think inferentially about all kinds of things. So inferential thinking is, what's your ideas about this? What do you think it's used for? What's the purpose of this object? What's the message that's being communicated? And we'll be doing that in a minute. So questions like, what's the main idea being shown in that picture? Or what's the main idea being said in this document or the message? Who is the intended audience? All of those things, I think, are really, really important when you're dealing with primary sources. And for some of us, you're like, absolutely, I know that. And I know that also, like, especially when we get into more advanced social studies classes, like AP classes, when I was teaching high school, you know, we had models for how to analyze primary source documents that took students deliberately through these steps so they could write a DBQ or whatever. But I think kids can do this at any level. That's why I chose that adorable little boy right there. Okay. So, and then finally, you know, I asked you guys to show me with your fist, and I think this is the highest level thinking of all, and the trunk tries to accomplish this, or the suitcase tries to accomplish this for kids, is trying to make a synthesis to some essential question that we have, or some kind of learning goal. Okay, so that's cool. Like, you know, we got out Chaim's suitcase, and you know, that group right over there, you guys were looking at the cup, and now we know that the cup is used for Shabbat. Well, what does that have to do with Chaim? What does that have to do with an immigrant experience? Why would he have that in his suitcase? Why do you think that's something important to him? What's the question that we're trying to learn today? And when you start tying it to a much greater objective, I think that's critical, and that you do have some goal, as I'm sure you do. And I know that for us, when we write curriculum for all of you to use, just like the Oregon Historical Society and just like JAMO, we're always thinking and making sure that our primary sources tie to a learning goal. And hopefully it's deepening our understanding of something broader. You know, a lot of us, for example, did not necessarily know what this thing was, right? And if my goal today is to give you a deeper cultural understanding of the Jewish religious identity, now you all know, and goal is accomplished, right? And we did that with an artifact. So I think, and why would Chaim have it in here? Well, because for Chaim, this is something that he would use in his synagogue, right? As a Jewish immigrant, and he's allowed to do that. So I use this suitcase primarily because it is for elementary school teachers. So I was really preaching to half of you in here about how it can be used at an elementary school level, but a lot of the things we're going to be looking at as well today are available at the secondary level. Okay, so the next thing, and I gave Dave like 100 things to photocopy, so I apologize. But if you guys go into your folder, you're going to find a document that's titled "Understanding Judaism Through Artifacts." Do you guys see that there? And I want to point out some things before we dive into that. This little square right here, I want to make meaning of for all of you so you understand what that's all about. Our goal is to provide educators across the state, K through 12, with learning resources for Senate Bill 664, the Holocaust and other genocide mandate. And I think one thing that's very, very intimidating for any educator at any level is that the Holocaust is extraordinarily hard history, right? It is the worst atrocity in recorded human history that I can think of. So how do we do that well? And that box right up there is part of a conceptual model that our director, Amanda Coven, who maybe some of you have met and hung out with, it's a really beautiful and elegant model for how to take students through a unit on the Holocaust. Based upon the Senate Bill 664 learning concepts. One of the things that we are learning as we are building this airplane around Senate Bill 664 as it flies through the sky is that we cannot dive into the Holocaust without humanizing Jewish people. And this whole entire thing of artifacts is to provide students an opportunity to humanize Jewish people. Particularly in the state of Oregon, there's a very small Jewish population, right? And so particularly for all of you as educators in your communities, it's possible that those students have never had any interaction whatsoever with Jewish people. And so their only narrative that they're going to get, possibly K through 12, is that Jews were targets in the Holocaust. So this lesson is really trying to humanize Jewish people by offering a really, really deep conceptual understanding of that. And we do that with artifacts that were donated to us in the museum. So that's what I mean, by artifacts. That's what we're using artifacts to get at that goal. Now, what I want to show you is how we do that. So one page that comes out of this lesson plan that I wanted to share with you is that Understanding Judaism Through Artifacts page. The other one that I wanted to share with you is this page that says Judaism, a brief overview. Do you guys see that? So you're going to want to have that like out next to it. And then the next thing is this thing that says mezuzah on it, and we just talked about a mezuzah. So that's the next page that you want. So if you have all three of those pages, the first page that you have, that Understanding Judaism Through Artifacts, one of the things, my wife is an elementary school teacher, and I was trying to put together a workshop for fifth graders, and all I was asking them to do was make inferential thoughts about what they were looking at. And she said, oh, no. What you should do is you should create an inference chart. And I said, what's an inference chart? And she was like, an inference chart. And then and I realized there's something pedagogical here that I need to learn. So once I found those out, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most brilliant thing. I love inference charts, and I hugged my wife. What is an inference chart? An inference chart, again, is just a way organizationally to get, and how many people use inference charts, by the way? All right, cool, so some people here are with me. At any level. It's a way to get students from very, very concrete observations. Like notice how it says word for word quotes. We got to go and identify some things, and the questions are really identification questions. What is this thing? What's it used for? This is provided for students, so they don't even need to make an inference. But this stuff is like, how does it connect? This is where like inference and synthesis is happening. So I would argue when you're having kids analyze any kind of primary source document, it doesn't have to be just this lesson plan, but it can be anything that you want to bring in for kids that's a primary source. This is one way to organize it. So one column is just identify the thing, like we've been doing today. And then the next thing is, can we make some kind of inference here? What does this connect to? And so that's what we're going to do right now. Now, the way that I did this, and this was a recommendation of the teacher advisory board, is to make things as clear as possible and scaffolded for kids, is notice that it's color-coded, it's blue, and it's red. And then when we publish this lesson plan, we're like, what if the community doesn't have a colored printer, okay? Or that's prohibitively expensive. Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to note is that at the very minimum, it's gonna be in bold. So the first thing I'd like you guys to do, okay, on your own or with a partner, and it's much more fun to talk to people than it is just to do it on your own, is let's just read about what a mezuzah is, okay? And learn about it, and then, in 3 minutes, can you identify, we know what the artifact is called, but the question is, find a word-for-word quote that helps you describe your artifact. What is the artifact's use as a religious object? So we're just at the identification level right now. And write down that right there in that little space, right there on that sheet, just a word-for-word quote. So go ahead and do that, and we'll take, and you can choose with a friend sitting next to you. Let's do this one, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, does anyone want to share the sentence that they thought best described the use of the object? Yes.
So I just took it for that first sentence of the second paragraph. The custom of placing the mezuzah on the doorpost of both the mitzvah. You shall write the move on the doorpost of the house and on the gates. Deuteronomy 6.
Perfect, okay? So you chose that one because you could see a connection for why it's used and how it's used. That's excellent. You guys, when we look up here, I just wanted to point out to you, the reason that we provide these is just to give students a description of that artifact and what it's made out of. Mezuzahs are really beautiful, and they get to see that there's lots of different varieties of them. These all, as you can also see, they provide how we got the mezuzah, and these descriptions come directly out of our archives. Okay, so now the next thing is this next part. And this is where things get a little more complicated. So we have this document for you to keep, Judaism, a brief overview. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to now connect this information with this information, right? This is where we're trying to make inferences about what does this thing have to do with being Jewish. And so the instructions are, first thing is these big titles here, okay? We're gonna be now looking for vocabulary that's bolded here that matches vocabulary that's bolded here, and seeing, okay, which topic does this thing most relate to? And then also a quote from the description of the artifact here that uses the same vocabulary here. So now we're trying to take a secondary source and match it to a primary source. And I'm curious how this goes. We piloted this with 2 different 7th grade classes, and at least for 7th graders, it seemed like this worked pretty well. So you're looking for a quote, okay, from the artifact that uses the same vocabulary as a topic, and then another quote that uses the same vocabulary from the artifact that's using vocabulary here. So you're just trying to, if your kids' reading comprehension level maybe is a little lower, and we did try to definitely make this accessible language for like 6 through 12, but at like a 7th grade level, we're really looking for matching up bolded words, right? So see where you can make the most matches, and then try and complete that vocabulary. So take just a couple of minutes to experiment with that right now and see how that goes for you. And again, if the inference chart isn't perfect for like what you do with your students, you could definitely tweak it in any way that you wanted. But take about 50 seconds and see, where does this thing seem to match up with one of these topics? Does anyone want to share with a match they could make with the overview? Any ideas there? What did you see words matching up?
So, and the bottom, it talks about covenants, and then in the mezuzah, it also talks about covenants, monotheistic, so you can use that bottom one at the bottom of the mezuzah to try to use monotheistic religion, the covenant of God.
Okay, awesome. So maybe we're seeing like Jews' relationship to God, the covenant, and the Torah. We could make a connection there. Okay, so then you guys see on the bottom here, it says complete each sentence with the knowledge your group gained from now all of these readings. And this is tied to now our big objectives. So this is when we're getting to a point of synthesis, right? I've learned that one important main idea about Judaism as a religion is, right? And this would be their own thought. They're now creating knowledge down here based upon the analysis that they've done. The next thing says, from this artifact, I've learned that Judaism is unique compared to other religions because, and that also is something that would be addressed in the brief overview, and they could be thinking about this, or they could be thinking about their own personal cultural perspective. This also might be in an Eastern civilization class where they've already studied other religions. The last question is from this artifact, or last statement, I see a connection between Judaism and other world religions because. So I can see, oh wow, this whole thing about the idea of a monotheistic religion, I can see that that's a connection that I could possibly make. So these are much more broad statements that are happening down here where we hope that synthesis is going to be occurring. So the next thing is what this lesson plan would then have students to do. And I was really surprised because, and you guys can see an example of this concept map on the back of the mezuzah and the directions. I thought, oh my gosh, this might be a little ambitious, and this might be higher level thinking, and this might blow kids out of the water. But I got a chance to see this 7th grade class at Beaumont Middle School in Portland put together their concept maps, and they really did a beautiful job. So the idea is we're doing a jigsaw model of instruction, and kids would be in different groups. So some kids had really analyzed the ketubah, for example, or this artifact, or this artifact, or this artifact. And then they're going to get together. Now, there's a group of 5 students, or it could be 4. And what they're trying to do now is make connections. So we have really blown this up, right? We've started with a primary source, and now we're really looking on developing some big main ideas that match according to the discussion I'm having with students. We can make a connection to other world religions, and we can also start to think about the differences between other world religions. And when a kid is done with that, I would hope at that point, because that's a very deep level of understanding about Judaism now, that's really humanized and demystified Judaism for kids, right? This lesson altogether, I think would take, we've got timestamps on our lesson plans, and I wonder if I'm going to go back here for just a second. Yeah, so 1 90-minute block period or 2 55-minute block periods. Hopefully that seems reasonable. When we piloted it, it seemed like that was the time, that time really worked. So I share all of this with you to show you how we design our lesson plans so that they're meeting this model of how do we increase higher level critical thinking skills through the use of primary sources. We're going to try another one for another aspect of Holocaust education that I think that's really important, and that's looking at propaganda as a primary source. Propaganda is really tricky, right? Because oftentimes propaganda needs to be contextualized. This propaganda to me is totally bizarre unless it's not given context. So we acknowledge that. But the real goal here is to try, when students are studying the Holocaust, to place the experience of Jewish people and the Holocaust in a historical moment. And again, we're going to use an inference chart for that purpose. But I want to show you the propaganda that we use. We acknowledge also, and I think it should be acknowledged, that to kids, when they're looking at propaganda, especially propaganda that's based upon negative stereotypes and scapegoating, that it's okay if they are thinking to themselves, whoa, this is really makes me uncomfortable and it's disturbing. Dave, we're just going to do one per teacher. So share those maybe with folks over there. That's what I'm saying. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. And so because I've noticed, especially when kids are confronted with really negative stereotypes, it's very discomforting for them. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to identify things that they see. And so these are the 3 primary sources that we use for this particular lesson plan. And Dave, what I'll do is, have you handed those ones out? Okay, cool.
I was trying to kind of give.
I think you're doing a great job. 1, 2, take those. Oh, I see what you were thinking. Okay, so what we're going to do is just take a look at one of them right now. So if you can pass those down.
You need a baseball skill. Oh, sorry, that was more than a
And all of these sources of propaganda were created by the Nazis at different times historically. And now we're looking at images, right, rather than artifacts. And so with this one, the handout that we provide for students to analyze this, I'll just show it to you. And I'm not certain whether, I don't think you guys have it in your packet, and that's okay. Just use what we have up on the screen, and you have it on your slide deck. what's interesting about how we've done this in workshops and we've done this in classrooms, and we noticed there was this real eagerness for kids to just make the inference, right? And so we're like, well, let's just put that on the top. So the first thing that kids will do is they're going to identify what is the stereotype here. But then we ask them to go back, and this is sort of like, tell me what you see that makes you know that. And so then they identify 3 details that make the stereotype clear. So I see this, I see this, I see this. And then the synthesis is, how does that relate to, how does the stereotype relate to scapegoating, which is something that has been developed up to this point in the lesson. We're kind of coming into the middle of the lesson here. I'd love to offer you guys an opportunity right now just to go through trying to draw a conclusion and also trying to observe specific details about the propaganda that you have in front of you. So you can have a conversation with people next to you, and let's take a couple of minutes to do that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On that picture, the one you handed out, it's got like the translation, I guess you could say, bottom. Is that given to kids?
The translation of this that's at the bottom, yeah, that's the translation.
Is it given to the kids now?
Say that one more time.
Is it given to students when you give it out?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And you're raising a good point about this one in particular, because what's written under it is utterly perplexing, and kids are like, what is this thing with Masons and, you know, all this strange language? For the point of this activity, I think it's important that they have the language, because they're going to be like, what is that? What does it say? What does it mean? But as a teacher, what I've done is I say, yeah, that's very confusing language, isn't it? And that's what makes propaganda tricky. Let's just focus on the image, okay? So yeah, take a couple of minutes and just, again, what do you think the stereotype is here? Okay, and then also, what are some details that are intentional in this art to communicate that stereotype? Now, we don't have, I don't have all the propaganda posters on the slide, but some of us looked at this one, and I'm curious, raise your hand when you looked at this if you found it pretty clear what the stereotype was that was being communicated here. How many people thought like, oh, this is clear? And how many people are familiar with that anti-Semitic stereotype? All right, good. So those kinds of connections, I only ask you guys that as educators so that you can be really clear, like what a persistent stereotype this has been. Does anyone want to raise their hand and share what they think the stereotype was that was being shown in this propaganda poster? Yeah.
So it's the idea that the Jew is trying to take over, take control of the whole world.
Absolutely, right? So Jewish people are in control of the world. They're trying to take over the world. And despite the language about the connection between Jewish people and the Masons and all that conspiracy theory stuff that was popular in the 30s by Hitler and the Nazis, the picture is pretty clear.
There's another one where the Jew is projected as an octopus taking a bite out of
right.
grabbing it.
Right, and there's octopus images that are very common and persist throughout history, and we show that in a workshop that we do. Who looked at this one? Who here looked at this one? This one's really interesting as well, and quite disturbing. What did you guys think the stereotype was in this one? Not quite sure.
Like the puppet mask, like the guy behind the curtain.
Yeah, right, okay. It's kind of the same, right? If we pull back the curtain to see who's responsible for the awful stuff in the world, we find out it is the Jew, right? And this language down here makes that clear that they were they instigated the war. That's World War II, by the way, which might cause some of us to sort of squint and nod like, what? And then the other thing is that they're causing the war to be prolonged. In other words, all German suffering is because of these people. This makes no rational historical sense, right? But nonetheless, if we look at these details carefully, again, we can see how that stereotype is being communicated and instigated, and then we can start asking some questions. Well, if Jewish people are responsible for all the world events and they're in control of the world and they're making the world spin, then what could I blame a Jewish person for? What could I scapegoat them for? Does anyone have an answer to that question? Everything, right? Everything, and that has happened, and that's another great synthesis moment for students because I think they start to understand, especially if they've looked at and created a concept map of like what the Jewish religious identity is, that these two things are completely inconsistent with each other, right? And that's all through primary sources. So that gives you a sense of again, another way that we can be thinking about with this particular type of source, which is complicated and needs to be unpacked, how we can use inference and how we can use identification to get our students through it. So just to point it out again, that's intentional inference there and identification bias. And also just to note that inference and identification can be reversed, and often students do that, and we all do that, just to make sense. That's just sense-making that we do in our brains. So the other thing that we like to do to also facilitate this is we have oral histories. And in our scapegoating and stereotypes lesson plan, we've put together digital curriculum. So I've gone through our oral histories and I've pulled out quotes from the oral histories that we have of our survivors. And I'd just love for you guys to hear Edith's voice. So if we could, let me see, I'm gonna have to go over here to the mouse. Awesome. All right, so we can just listen to Edith and you can hear from our oral histories how this comes across.
I was called, that was in 35, so I was called on the street by a boy in a crowd. The boy had gone to school with my brother, so even though I didn't know him. We did go to some dances and sing, and I met him once. He called me a dreckiger Jude und hat mich spit at me. But that was about all. I personally, you just knew that you were unwelcome. You saw the signs everywhere. Juden nicht erlaubt. The Nuremberg laws came out. I don't think at that time I didn't have to wear anything. That didn't come until 1938. You just felt it. Now, I walked through the streets of a town which I'd been walking for. Now, you mustn't forget, in 33 was my 20th birthday. So I wasn't really a child anymore. I remember the stores. In fact, they had the book burning on April the 1st, 1933. And the night before, Schwab bookstore called me, Mr. Schwab, and he was of course an elder man, but he knew me because I was in that store a lot. I bought a lot of books, I looked at books, and I read an awful lot. And he had a lending library too, so I got an awful lot of books there. And he called me and said, Fräulein Rosenthal, do you want to come tonight after dark? I put a box of books away for you. You want to have them? They are books by Jewish authors. Tomorrow I have to give all my books to the committee and they're going to burn them. So he gave me several books. I still have them.
So there we go. With this digital curriculum, just to point some things out, This is what the digital curriculum is called, The Holocaust in Oregon Perspective, and there's a page on our website. This is all available to you for free. Not only can students hear her voice in the context of that propaganda lesson, but they also can click here. We provide a biography of Edith, and that's her husband, Paul. There's wonderful pictures that we have in our archive of their experience. And then you'll notice it says return. Students can click here, go back, and even learn more stories. So this is also all used as a series of different primary source documents to fulfill the humanization of Jewish people who lived through it, but also to match up with other primary source documents in a lesson. The next one that I think that I'd like to share with you that we have as a lesson talks about photographs. And we did, Emily's already done a lot of work with photographs, and I realized that I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna kind of cruise through this one. This tells the story of Heinrich Ross. Raise your hand, is anyone familiar with Heinrich Ross? His story is pretty amazing. Heinrich Ross was in the Lodz ghetto in Poland. He was hired by the Nazis because he was a photojournalist, and he was supposed to take propaganda photographs. But he was given tons of photographic materials. And Heinrich Ross would walk around the Lodz ghetto, and he'd hide his camera in his jacket, and he would sneak photographs. He had, I think, the collection of photographs was something in the neighborhood of 3,000 negatives that he had of photographs, and he hid them. When the ghetto was liquidated, he stayed behind to do cleanup of the ghetto. And he hid his negatives. After the war, he went back and he dug them up, and he was able to recover them. You'll see a lot of the photographs are damaged just because of weather damage, but we have this incredible catalog of photographs of someone who was on the ground right there in the Lodz ghetto, photographing things that the Nazis wanted him to photograph and photographing things that they would prefer that he not. These are a sample of some of the photographs. So in this particular lesson, students are given lots of photographs, and they're given the opportunity to group them in different ways, a parts to the whole lesson about different parts of life in the Lodz ghetto. And what's really interesting also is to have conversations again with students about the distinction between propaganda and real photojournalism. Just to give you a sample of some of the stuff, like this photograph right here was a propaganda photograph, intentionally made to seem like Jews were given work, they worked in clean conditions, whereas this is a much different telling of a story of the making of food. You can see this guy and his conditions, but there's also other amazing photographs of people hugging children, of kids playing, of weddings occurring, of Shabbat, and the persistence of Jewish people in these dehumanizing circumstances finding their humanity. So that's another really wonderful opportunity to give kids an opportunity to just discover on their own and have their minds changed about maybe some dehumanizing stereotypes they have about Jewish people during the Holocaust. Again, I'd like to share with you, we have a ghettos digital experience. I'd love for us to take a moment to listen to Alice Kern. I like to highlight our survivors from Oregon. Alice moved to Oregon after the Holocaust. She was in Auschwitz. You can see, actually, she still has her tattoo on her arm right here, barely survived. But the other thing that's amazing about Alice is if you read Night in your classrooms by Elie Wiesel, she's from Saget. She knew Elie Wiesel as a child, and they lived together. We had to digitally remaster her recording, and you'll hear it's really crackly. I mean, not only are we losing first-generation survivors, but another interesting thing, just to mention to kids if you want to, is if you use this resource, is that even the condition of some of the primary source recordings that we have, or video, or anything like that, it's all degrading. We were lucky to be able to digitally remaster this as best as we could.
In my hometown, Siget, they took all the Jewish people. They had to lock their doors behind them and come over to one end. Luckily, my home was in that part of town, so we each opened our homes, and in every room a family moved in. We had to clear out the rooms, no beds, no tables. They had to sit already and sleep on the floors. My mother and I moved over to my aunt's quarters. My aunt got sick and she was in a hospital. She had 2 little children. So we lived with her 2 children in her quarters, and 3 other rooms were opened up for other families. And yet, they were my friends. I didn't have to go downtown to meet them. We were all together in the ghetto, and we don't do nothing. We gathered every day, we talked, we laughed, we sang. No one realized what hit us. And it was 1944. We were saved until 1944.
I'm wondering, as I tell you about Heinrich Ross and the photos that he took and some of the things that he captured, when I was putting this digital curriculum together and chose some of these quotes, I chose this particular quote for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that there's a sentence in here that really surprised me, that I wouldn't have expected a survivor to have said about their ghetto experience. Can you guess which one that is? Yeah. We talked, we laughed, we sang. There are so many moments in oral histories where your preconceived notions about history are challenged, and we also have pictures of Alice Kern. She, of course, was not that age. She was only, I think, about 14 or 15 years old with her friends walking through downtown Siget. And they look so cool. I mean, that's the other thing, is they look like these just really cool teenage girls, and they're like arm in arm, and they're like striding, and they're wearing like really cool outfits. And that's another way, I think, for kids to see this youth and connect with this youth in a really humanizing way. So there you go. There's another example of how we use oral histories, and we have also in our lesson plans suggestions for how to use those in a productive way. Another lesson that we use that addresses another part of Holocaust studies, which is justice, memory, and legacy, and to analyze how individuals and communities move forward after atrocity, is letters. We're very, very fortunate to have a collection of letters from Max Vielgut, that man right there, who was the uncle of one of our current survivors who's still alive, Evie Banco. And the letters are the letters that Max wrote to Evie's mother trying to get out of Europe and trying to escape. Evie's family was lucky enough, they didn't go with Max, but the rest of the family had fled through the Soviet Union and then China and then Japan, and Max got stuck in France. We have all the letters that he sent to his sister, and we've organized them on this interactive timeline here. They start in 1940, they go all the way down through 1944. I just wanted to show you an example of one of them, and we can read it together here quickly. My dear sister, I'm encountering so much bureaucracy, so I'm getting more and more pessimistic about father or me ever getting to America. Max's father had disappeared into Poland, but amazingly, they were able to correspond through the Red Cross. Only through direct intervention from the State Department in Washington can a visa be issued, and they have placed even more restrictions. You now need the exact dates of all places of residence and occupation since 1930, your political activity, convictions and arrests for political and other reasons, and if you have relatives in Germany or other occupied territories, you cannot get a visa. As you read Max's stories, it provides an exceptional insight into how difficult it was to get out. But moreover, it also has kids think in this lesson plan, using that as a context about after the Holocaust, what's been done with the issue of refugees. So this is 6 learning activities. It's more like a unit like Oregon Historical Society would do. It's more like a curriculum, and it starts very broadly, just looking at issues of refugees in general and vocabulary, going all the way down to Max, and then it also offers opportunities to connect with our local survivor stories in that digital experience. So that's another example with letters. One thing I didn't, you guys, you'll notice I didn't like hyperlink things for you in the slide deck, but I'd love for us to do this together right now. So I don't know why I didn't think to do hyperlinks, because all I do is hyperlinks. Go to ojmche.org just so I can show you how you can access this stuff, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about other programming that's available. And I want to be conscientious of time here. In the drop-down menu on the side, go to Teach and Learn. Click on Teachers, and then go on the Lesson Plans tab. So I'm going to escape out of this and open a new tab here. So ojmche.org. There's the website. Here's the drop-down menu, Teach and Learn, Teachers, and then you click on this tab, Lesson Plans. The lesson plans, which I've already discussed, are available here on the website. So I talked about this one, the Understanding Judaism Through Artifacts lesson plan. Also the Analyzing Stereotypes and Scapegoating lesson plan. This is another lesson plan, but I didn't have time to get into it, so we have other lesson plans. There's the Refugees and Obligation to Protect lesson plan with the letters from Max. There's the Life in the Lodz Ghetto that deals with the photographs of Heinrich Ross. For elementary school teachers, this just another pitch. This is not a primary source lesson, but it's a picture book lesson called You, Me, Us, a lesson about caring and our responsibility to protect others using the picture book I Walk with Vanessa. But the whole year in a life, getting the suitcase, digital experience is down here. This has to be ordered. Everything else for you guys, if you want these lesson plans, they are free. And all you have to do is just click, and there it is. And then you can download it directly from our website for free. We do ask that you fill out this to download it. It's a very quick form. And then it'll download and it'll immediately be yours. So that's a free resource. The other thing that I wanted to show you guys is the digital experiences. So where do we get those oral histories and photos and all that good stuff? The digital experience, the Holocaust, an Oregon perspective, is one of several digital experiences we have. I'm showing that to you specifically because I imagine for us, we are most interested in Senate Bill 664. Again, you go to OJMCHE, you go to Teach and Learn, go to Teachers, but this time you're going to click on Digital Experiences, and then there is a form so we can send you the links. Those are just Google slide presentations that are organized as hyperdocs. totally low budge, I admit, but we're all familiar with that technology, so that also makes it kind of easy and nice. And your request for that should be answered in 48 hours. If you guys want to take a couple of minutes right now, I'd love to give you some time. If you think to yourself about, okay, is there anything here that I'd like to have, that you go for it right now. The digital experience tab is over here. Boom. And then this is, if you want to order the Holocaust one, just click that box. The Holocaust in Oregon perspective, fill out this form, and there are some questions here. Those are just for data purposes and for our metrics, and they're helpful for us. If you can keep this as brief as possible as you want, and then just submit that, and we'll get that back to you. So let's take I still have 10 minutes. I want to show you some other things, but let's just take I want to give you guys like a good 3 minutes right now. And if you have colleagues here as well, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, we could use that. Go ahead and have conversations with your colleagues and figure out what you'd like to grab. First thing, the thing I just handed out to you is just another example of the type of handouts or activity sheets that we use to frame how we could have students analyze those letters. You'll notice that there's questions that go all the way around. And so, again, that's just to give you guys also some helpful ideas for any primary source documents that you have. The last thing that I wanted to share with you, and this is really important to me, and I didn't think to put this in my presentation, which was a mistake, is that on our Teach and Learn website for teachers, 2 announcements that I'd like to make, and these are not things that we have to think about as in terms of pedagogy, but offerings for us. One is we are looking for a new teacher advisory board, and we're going to be sending out applications on our website. We have a K-5 teacher advisory board. We also have a 6 through 12. It is so valuable to us to get a perspective from Eastern Oregon. Right now, we only have teachers from Southern Oregon and from the sort of Willamette Valley. So if you're interested, there's a stipend for that, much like with Oregon Historical Society for serving on their teacher advisory board. We meet once a month, and we meet for like an hour, and it's really for us to sort of share with you our programming and get thoughts and ideas from you from a teacher perspective of how we can make sure our programming is really great. The other thing that we're really looking for kids to get involved in is our art and writing competition. The art and writing competition is sort of like Oregon Historical Society's competition for students. If you have students that love to do art and they love to write, or both, or one or the other, and this is for 6 through 12. We have our 2024 prompt, which is up on our website. Anyone can submit from around the state. And this year I negotiated with funders because we realize one thing that teachers might be thinking is, this is prohibitively complicated for us, but we've made it so we can make it awesome for your kids. We do offer a fully funded trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for them and a parent. We have fully taken into account that we'll pay for the parent paying for gas to get them all the way from Joseph, Oregon to the Portland airport, hotel, everything's paid for, or a trip to Los Angeles to visit the Holocaust Museum. That's the other option, and that's 3 nights, paid hotel room, paid ground transportation, meal stipend, everything. So we don't want to make this something that seems like it's not equitable or it's going to be too complicated. We have other Oregon-based grand prizes as well, but they're age-specific, and that's why they're not on the website. A writing program at Lewis and Clark for high school students, and then an art program at Oregon State University during the summer for, that's for 8th grade all the way up through 12th grade. So if you have kids that you're like, man, my student is an awesome writer, and I just think that this would be so great for them, really encourage them to apply. We'd love to get, this is a statewide competition, and we'd really like everyone to be represented. All right, I have 5 minutes left in my presentation, but I'm done.